Hello guys, so I have something very interesting to tell you. I'm going to talk to you about an exercise that can teach you a lot about training, a very surprising amount of things about training, and this exercise is the sit-up. So the purpose of this video is not that you would afterwards be like sit-up is the best exercise and you definitely need to do it, but you will notice while I go through this exercise and explain some things about it, just how much there's things that you can actually hidden also that you can learn about it because of the reaction that people also have it. Almost all people have at some point in their life, they've done sit-ups or something. It's a familiar exercise for them. It's one of probably the most popular abdominal exercises out there. And there's a lot of sort of also this sort of like fallacies also about it. People have these negative connotations about it. And I actually started to think about this like some days ago because I actually had to like explain this to a person who was asking me about sit-ups, and I was very worried about this exercise because people are afraid they will hurt themselves. And I was thinking about like where does this come from that it's such a bad exercise? Of course I know that nowadays YouTube is filled with videos that say it's bad and then they try to give their own exercises to replace it. But I think, for example, in my childhood, I remember very vividly, I was watching the TV and you have those shopping channels where they're trying to sell all kinds of stuff from kitchen equipment, whatever, furniture, to cleaning stuff. And then they also have this section where they're selling training equipments. So you have these TV commercials. So you probably know what I'm talking about, like you've seen those at some point in your life, and every time if they have some sort of app equipment there, like some Apptronic, whatever, I don't remember the names of those equipments that they have, but at some point they have this like a picture where a person is doing sit-ups, and it says something like, are you tired of doing the countless of sit-ups or something, and then they do the sit-up and they're like, oh, it's like it hurts their back. So this is basically the image that I have. I remember seeing this many times in those TV commercials when they're trying to promote their product. But what this is really, see, there are two things that they can count on basically from these people who are watching these commercials. First of all, if they're watching it, they want to have abs. Okay, and the second thing is that they've had at some point back pain. So they're watching this commercial, they recognize, hey, I've had back pain at one point, and also they have done sit-ups at some point in their life. Because as I explained, sit-ups are such a popular exercise. You can see many boxers do them, like very famous boxers. They're in the movies, in training montages, and so on and so on. And every, I think, sports class in elementary school or whatever, we use this. In military, it's used in the tests there. We do sit-ups. So everyone has tried sit-ups. Nearly everyone has had back pain at some point. So if you're trying to sell your abdominal equipment, what do? You put these things together and people are like, hey, that's me, maybe I should get that program. But I think like this, at least in some ways, promoted the very bad and negative idea that people have about sit-ups. Since then the YouTube has taken over and people still use that same trick, sit-up, back pain, to gain gain views, gain attention, be able to sell their own whatever it is. And for example, I think like this has caused a lot of trouble in people's head, and this I can also see about some of the questions that I received from people that concern the sit-up. And people are so worried because now they have pain, and when you have pain, it can be traumatizing, it causes a lot of strong emotions. These are locked up in your body, and then you plan to sit up and whatever, and that's the center of your attention, when there's really a host of things that actually you need to take care of in your body, and the sit-up is really not the center there you necessarily need to focus on. But so I will very soon go into the actual execution of the sit-up. I'm going to show you also how to do it properly, how you can do it in a way that it actually works very nicely. But so there's the other thing that concerns it, that comes from the sort of physical therapy world, where there's actually like professionals trying to analyze the movement of people, why they're getting problems, and hip flexors. So hip flexors has been one of the main things to blame. if you have back pain or hip pain or whatever, you have tight hip flexors and you need to stretch those hip flexors, and that will, solve your problems. Maybe you strengthen some glutes on the side as well, but hip flexors have been blamed a lot about these issues. And it just so happens that when you're doing sit-ups, if you do them in an actual way where you really raise into the sitting position, you are working your hip flexors there. So for people this is a problem, because now, okay, if my hip flexors are super tight and they're overactive, so I shouldn't be using them, because if I use them it makes my problem even worse. It makes my back pain worse and other issues in my body worse. So sit-up is a very bad exercise because it also trains the hip flexors. So hip flexors are one of those issues that really raises concerns with people, and because they've been so demonized by the sort of personal training and physical therapy world to be the issue. The other second concern is, of course, the rounding the spine. So you're flexing your spine when you're doing a sit-up. And people, this is something where people attach a lot of negativity, not just in sit-ups, but whether it's the deadlift or something. You should never have your back rounded, because this places a lot of compression force on your spine, and there's all these theories how it will break under a load, and of course it can be a compromised position for many people, but there's this idea that it's inherently nearly bad, and you shouldn't train it, because there's so many other ways you can train, your better ways you can train your abs. So flexing your spine is dangerous, using your hip flexors contributes to a lot of problems. So why should anyone do this? Why am I doing? Why do I have videos of sit-ups on my channel? And I sometimes say that it can be a useful exercise. So this is the main thing that I want to really talk about here. First of all, sit-up, I'll go here and start to perform. The hip flexors are very, very important muscle in your body. And trying to lock them into this box where they're only something that is tight because of the too much sitting is a very oversimplified approach. Because this is also the thing, when people are sitting in the chairs, so they're like, okay, so your hip flexors need to be tightened up, and that is really the case. But if you are sitting all day long, you don't do nearly any exercise, and you're just sitting on the computer like this way, hip flexors are really not probably the core of your problems. Every single area in your body is probably not functioning very well. Your glutes, your hips, your hip rotators are not, they're completely inactive. Your spine, your lumbar spine is inactive. Your upper thoracic area, your neck can be crooked. If you're sitting really all day long and you just blame your hip flexor for your problems, that is a very, very oversimplified approach. Like this I can tell, because there's a host of areas that are not functional. And sit-up is another exercise that if someone comes to as a complete beginner, I would never recommend them to start with sit-ups, absolutely, like immediately. Okay, but the thing is that hip flexors are also a highly complex muscle group, and there's many different articulations that you need to actually train them and to make them functional. If you're sitting, it doesn't mean that you have even half of the articulations covered that your hip flexors can do. In wide, in narrow, in different rotations, all these articulations actually work different muscle groups here, and the weakness of these muscle groups contributes to the tightness of the muscles. It contributes also to those different positions where they might be pulling your lumbar spine with too much arching or whatever. So treating them as something that's just tight will really not bring value to these muscles that they deserve. So we need to start understanding that training the hip flexors is actually good, and you should be training your hip flexors to make sure that they are functional. And when you're doing sit-up in a controlled manner, it's actually an excellent way to target the sit-ups, or it can be. The problem is always in the execution. And when it comes to the rounding of the spine, this is also a very natural articulation of your body. This is something that you can train, and when you train something, you usually get stronger. Because, see, there are these studies, for example, of people where they say when you round it, or the sit-up can cause this and this amount of compressive force on your spine, and this is detrimental. The same, they have studies, this and this exercise or knees over toes causes so much stress on your knees. And then they put this number up there. This is what it causes to your body, this amount of stress. But they never really look at like how much your spine can actually take force, how much you can take. You can have a huge number, like it takes like this and this amount of, this causes a lot of stress, but you never show what is the capacity of your body to take the stress. Okay, this is usually not concerned. The other thing that is not really figured out is that it goes completely against the whole idea of training, where you place stress on your body. This is the idea of your body. You're stressing your body in different articulations under control. And this is how you actually get stronger over time, when you don't pass the extreme limit there in the start. So you can actually get stronger and train these things to be able to withstand more stress. Your body adapts, you can become stronger. So this is another thing that sometimes comes out. There's like studies that show an arbitrary number that say that this is your limit, this is how much you can take, or this will over time lead to bad problems. And then it's like saying like you can never get stronger, or your body can't adapt to. Okay. But so I will show the correct execution here of the sit-up. So first of all, people are concerned, if they skip their abs during the sit-up, so they dominate with the hip flexors. So one way that is very easy to actually take this concept away is make sure you can anchor your legs. This is very important, because for most people, if you do it unanchored like this way, it's very hard to do this without like momentum. Like you need to use speed like this way, and this is the only way you can get up. So you can't do it with the control. For some people this might be an issue, and this can also perhaps cause some problems if you're not ready to do that sort of motion fast, flex your spine. So make sure you have something. I set up here like this, what are these, cycles here, so I can really, there's like a sturdy thing that I can put my legs into. So now I have full control of my legs. I don't have to worry that they will swing backwards. And what I do in the very first, in the beginning, the start is, I contract here, I do a crunch. So this is an exercise that you can also just do. You can just be crunching like this way. But I do this also when I initiate the sit-up. So I crunch, your arms can be even here, just touching your core. So you can be very, very certain that you are working your core. The second thing is, you start to come up, go slowly. This already feels a lot. Slow, you don't need to go like stop on the way, but you get the idea. So if I go here, I crunch, I come up slow, and so whenever I've reached the end point of my crunching, I can't go anymore, basically crunch myself further, then I activate my hip flexors. So these hip flexor muscles are not active, but I'm using it with control. And this phase where I'm coming up and holding the crunch position is in a way the stabilizing phase of the of the sit-up. So when you're doing a proper sit-up in a controlled manner, you actually have two different phases, and you're working your abdominals in two different manners. First one is the mobility phase, where you're crunching, you have the maximal flexion of your spine. The second one is being able to maintain this crunched, stabilized position while you pull yourself up to that sitting position. So this is also what many people kind of miss. There's actually two parts. It's not an isolation, it's a two-part movement. We have our spine is moving and our hip flexors are moving. And so when you do it, or when you're going down, it's the same way. You need to stabilize here so that you don't let your back straighten up. You need to stabilize. When you lower yourself, hip flexors are active again, and here I roll my spine open like so, and again like so. You can keep the arms here. If you keep them here, you have more resistance. Crunch and come up. So my abs are just a few repetitions, and some people are saying that they can't feel their abs or something during the sit-up. This is not the fault of the exercise itself. This is the fault of your faulty execution of the exercise. And this comes to also a very interesting point. that was brought to my attention is, for example, now the hip flexors, because we want to take them, some people they live in that world where they want to take them away, whereas I think that using the hip flexors helps you to better control your abdominals, not the other way around. They don't take away from your abdominals, they actually help to train your abdominals with control. But when you live in the world where you want to take the hip flexors away, there's also this sort of alternative that people are doing, which is called the Janda sit-up. I'm not sure how this is pronounced. I think it's Janda sit-up, which is basically the idea in this sit-up is that you would be doing a sit-up where you don't use the hip flexors, which I can already tell you that this is impossible. If you do the sit-up in a way where you are at some point in a position where your hips are flexed, you're going to be using the hip flexors, so you can't actually take them away. But people have this compulsion that you're not supposed to use the hip flexors and they're bad. So here we enter with the Janda sit-up. And the idea behind this Janda sit-up is that you anchor your legs. Actually, this is a perfect thing for the Janda sit-up because you're supposed to anchor your legs so that you have this sort of like a bar going under your legs or under your heel part. So what I can do when the bar would go under here, oh, it's there. What I can do is I can try to do this with my legs. So what this motion does is it activates my hamstrings. It also, you're supposed to activate your glutes while you're doing the sit-up. And now we come to the science of the reciprocal inhibition, because these are the antagonist muscles to my hip flexors. And usually if I'm doing this motion, I move my leg back and I contract my hamstrings, this means that in order for me to do this motion, the muscles here on the front of my thigh, the hip flexors, they must relax. Because if they are holding tight, I can't bring my leg back. So when I'm using the antagonist muscles on this my posterior side, the back side of my leg, then I relax these muscles here. Or basically I deactivate them. So when I'm doing the hip flexor and I contract these muscles on the posterior side, then I deactivate the hip flexors and I can do the sit-up without using the actual hip flexors. So it sounds very nice on this paper, but the reciprocal inhibition is not a magical switch to turn off your muscles. So when I'm doing this, I can contract my glutes and hamstrings as much as I want. And the only thing it does, it makes this work harder. Because there is no like possible manner for you to be in this position and not have your hip flexors working. This is the thing. You can contract as much as you want your hamstrings and your glutes and everything, and the only thing you're doing is you are contracting your hip flexors harder. And so the thing here is that when people do this Janda sit-up, and they're like, well, it becomes harder. The sit-up becomes much harder, I feel my abs better. And the number one reason for this is because this is not the first time that you're perhaps doing your sit-ups with actual control. But to do them with control, you can do this without any sort of fancy equipment. You can do this also without contracting your hamstrings and glutes. This is good, I think, for additional stability. I've also talked about, for example, the antagonist co-contraction principle. For example, when you do a press and I lower the weight, I'm working the muscles here that are basically should be passive, but I'm guiding it in that sort of passive range of motion. I'm still using the muscles. I made a video of that some time ago. But so in this in this exercise also here, as I was explaining, what happens is when you contract these antagonist muscles, you're actually forcing your hip flexors to work harder. You also usually probably just take away the momentum, so it becomes harder to do the exercise, which is also good. It becomes more controlled form of exercise, and this is fine. But it also brings out this lack of understanding of the body. We put the body on the paper. We have a theory that sounds very nice: reciprocal inhibition, being able to deactivate these muscles, and so on and so on. But in action, these people have never really felt their body. They haven't like really experienced their body when you're doing the hip flexor. You can do it yourself. You can try to contract as hard as you want. your glutes, your hamstrings, and you do the sit-up, and you will feel your hip flexors probably harder than if you didn't do that. So there's these sort of fallacies that also, it's not only that it doesn't hold truth, the whole theory of it, but it also is unnecessary. Because as I was explaining, by doing the sit-up properly, you're using the hip flexors to your own advantage. It helps you to actually train your core. I hear this sometimes, it really is a problem for people, because even sometimes when you're doing lying leg raises, you're doing a hanging leg raises or something, and the people are like, well, you're actually just moving your legs up and down, so you're training the hip flexors. But you're using your core to stabilize the motion here. If I'm doing this leg raise, so people are like, well, you're just using here. You just train the hip flexors. But I cannot do it without this being super hard contracted. So you can use the hip flexors or whatever as your advantage to train your abdominals better. Your abdominals and hip flexors need to work in a synergistic manner. But so as I explained already in the start, the purpose here is not for you to think that sit-up is the thing that you need to do and it's the best of them all. It's just a great, really sort of exercise to learn about yourself. It's a great exercise to also bring out this sort of misconceptions that I think are there out in the world of fitness, and just explain and open up also these fears that people have over their bodies. Because there is a chance that you will cause problems with the sit-up, and this mostly comes from the bad execution. I showed you here the good one, which you can try out yourself. You should feel very, very nicely in core. But bad execution and overemphasis of one single exercise, so you don't have a balanced routine. If you want to really train your core properly, sit-up is one of the exercises out of a dozen that at least a dozen that you need to be doing. And also you need to be training your back as well. So as a part of a balanced routine, done in a good manner, it's an excellent way to train your hip flexors and your abdominals as well. But if you have problems with it, there's thousands of different abdominal exercises that you can choose from that are maybe better suited for yourself. But I hope this clears out if anyone is wondering why are we sort of going against the grain of some other popular YouTubers, for example, who demonize sit-ups, who demonize hip flexors, and you understand why we actually use sometimes the sit-ups and also how to do it properly. And maybe this gives you also a better idea of not to rely too much on the things that other people say about exercises, because they might not have really the complete experience of this exercise. And that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed, and if there's anything you'd like to know, some other video subjects maybe that are interesting to you, then you can comment down below and let me know. But otherwise, I'll say take care and stay strong. Alright guys, I have a bonus for you, the most advanced possible sit-up variation, and this is something that I say like don't actually try. Because this is hard, and I think that many people can actually hurt themselves because this requires a very strong spine, very strong abdominals, and very, very good control from your hip flexors. This is actually hip flexor stability, one of the toughest you can even do. So normally hip flexor sit-up, I move the hip flexors. I'm moving up and down. Now I lock them in place. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna perform, I need to really press my legs there. I will perform a sort of full range crunching motion in the air. This is called the arched sit-up. So what I do is, you see this, or still I arch my back. You can see my back is arched. And I come back. So I arch. I come back. Okay. So if you, this requires such an immense pressure also internally to keep yourself sort of the support of your spine. So I breathe in, I hold the breath, I go down there, squeeze my muscles as hard as I can. I can feel the abdominals are stretched to the max, and then I contract and come back to that position. This is also just a sort of like as a demonstration where arching, rounding, all of these articulations that are possible for your body to master. Now, like I already said, this is not where you start from. There's a host of other things that you probably need to prepare to be able to do this sort of exercise safely. But every single one of these things you can master. There's so many things in your body. You don't need to always be afraid. Approach things in a correct manner. Listen to your body. Know when you're capable and ready to move on to more advanced feats. And understand that there are always progressions that you can take to become stronger, and there's always a way to heal your body if you're in a bad situation with it.